Chapter 1. The letter from the moors. It was one of those evenings in London when the fog seemed almost alive, curling around lamp-posts, muffling the sound of carriage wheels, and turning the glow of streetlights into trembling orbs of gold. Inside the warmth of Whitehaven mansions, Hercule Poirot sat at his desk, aligning a stack of correspondence so precisely that even the smallest tilt would offend his sense of order. Hastings, lounging comfortably by the fire, watched with quiet amusement.
"Another invitation to a dinner, I suppose?"
he said lightly. Poirot lifted a brow but said nothing. His eyes were fixed on a peculiar envelope, cream parchment, sealed with a heavy blot of crimson wax, pressed with the unmistakable impression of a raven's wing. The detective studied it in silence. There was something curious about the handwriting, elegant, deliberate, yet betraying a trace of nervous haste. He slit the seal with his silver letter opener, unfolding the paper carefully, as if afraid the mystery might crumble if handled too roughly. The note within was brief. "Monsieur Poirot, an unfortunate death has occurred at Ravenhall, my family's ancestral home in Yorkshire. The matter is delicate, and though it may appear accidental, I am persuaded otherwise. Your discretion is as famed as your skill. Might you come at once? Sincerely, Lady Helena Crowhurst." Poirot's lips twitched faintly. "Ravenhall," he murmured.
"An ominous name, n'est-ce pas, Hastings?"
"There is poetry in it, and where there is poetry, there is often tragedy." Hastings leaned forward, intrigued.
"You think it's a murder?"
Poirot shrugged delicately. "I think, mon ami, that when an English lady writes of discretion, there is more beneath the ink than she dares to say." Outside, the fog thickened against the window panes as the city sank into its nightly hush. Poirot folded the letter and placed it precisely on his desk, as if it were already a piece of evidence. "Pack your bag, Hastings," he said softly. "We go to Yorkshire." Hastings blinked.
"Tonight?"
Poirot nodded, a gleam in his eyes. "Evil does not rest even for one night. And besides, a raven waits." The following morning, the two men found themselves aboard the early train bound for the north. The rhythmic clatter of wheels filled the compartment as the landscape changed from the brick and bustle of London to rolling fields wrapped in mist. Poirot, immaculate as ever, sat opposite Hastings, a small notebook balanced on his knee. "You have been unusually quiet," Hastings remarked. "Are you thinking about the case?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Always, mon ami. I am thinking of the woman who writes with such urgency, yet hides her fear behind elegant words. I am thinking of the hall that bears the name of a bird that feeds on death. And I am thinking," he added softly, "of why she wrote only to me." By afternoon, the train pulled into a small country station, swallowed by fog. A carriage awaited them, its driver a gaunt man with a cap pulled low over his brow.
"Ravenhall, sirs?"
he asked in a gravelly voice. Poirot inclined his head. The road wound through miles of bleak moorland, where the wind moaned like something alive. Occasionally, dark shapes appeared in the mist, twisted trees, lonely stone walls, and once what might have been a graveyard. Hastings shivered and drew his coat tighter. Poirot merely gazed out, expression unreadable. When at last the outline of Ravenhall emerged,
it did so as if conjured from shadow. A vast, brooding mansion perched on a rise,
its windows glinting dully in the fading light. The stone facade was draped in ivy, and at its highest point, a weathered gargoyle crouched like a sentinel. As they approached, the great wooden doors opened with a long, echoing groan. A butler, pale and severe, stood waiting. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," he said in a low voice. "Lady Crowhurst is expecting you." Inside, the hall was vast and cold. Oil paintings of unsmiling ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow as the visitors passed. A massive staircase rose into shadow, and somewhere above a clock chimed, slow, deliberate, mournful. Poirot paused to glance around, his gaze sharp.
The house, he said softly, has memory. It does not forget. Lady Helena Crowhurst descended the staircase with quiet grace.
She was tall, elegant, and veiled in mourning black. "Monsieur Poirot," she greeted, her voice low and steady. "Thank you for coming." Poirot bowed slightly. "Madame, it is always a sorrow when death calls, but more so when it wears the mask of mystery." Her lips trembled faintly. "My husband, Lord Alistair Crowhurst, was found dead 3 nights ago. They say it was an accident, a fall from the west balcony." "But I know—" She hesitated, her eyes glinting with unshed tears. "I know it was not." Poirot's eyes flickered toward the grand staircase, then back to her. "And why, madame, are you so certain?" She drew in a breath. "Because," she whispered, "the night before he died, he told me someone, or something, was watching him, and when they found him there was a raven feather on his chest. For a long moment no one spoke. The wind sighed against the windows." Poirot inclined his head slowly, the faintest smile touching his lips. "Then, Lady Crowhurst," he said, "we shall see what secrets the shadows of Ravenhall are so eager to hide." Chapter 2. The footsteps in the fog, the road to Ravenhall twisted like a serpent through the moors, veiled in a heavy mist that clung to every hedge and stone. The carriage wheels groaned as they climbed the last slope, and Captain Hastings, with his collar turned up against the cold, peered out into the gloom. "A bleak sort of place, isn't it?" he muttered. Poirot, sitting opposite with impeccable composure, merely inclined his head. "Bleak, yes," he said softly, but very suggestive. "The English countryside, Hastings, so tranquil on the surface, yet how often has it concealed the darkest of tragedies?" As the carriage drew nearer, the outline of Ravenhall grew clearer. An enormous grey stone mansion crouched against the horizon, its turrets and chimneys silhouetted against a fading amber sky. The surrounding moor stretched wide and silent, broken only by the occasional cry of a distant bird. A single lantern burned above the great front door, casting a faint circle of light upon the gravel drive. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Notice, Hastings, how it burns, not brightly, but as if reluctant to illuminate the darkness it keeps at bay. Even light seems afraid here." The carriage came to a halt, and the butler, the same pale, grave man from the night before, stepped forward. "Lady Crowhurst is waiting in the library, monsieur." Poirot descended carefully, adjusting his hat, his sharp gaze sweeping the façade of the house. The stone walls were damp with moss, the windows curtained, and the ivy that clung to the southern wing seemed almost black in the half-light. Hastings followed, casting a doubtful glance upward. "You know, Poirot," he said uneasily, "this place gives me the creeps." Poirot smiled faintly. "Then it is performing its duty well, mon ami. A house with secrets must always whisper before it speaks." Inside, the great hall was vast and echoing. Portraits of long-dead Crowhursts lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow every step. A massive fireplace dominated the room, though the fire within it burned low. Lady Helena awaited them there, her black gown trailing across the marble floor. She greeted them with a nod and gestured to 2 chairs by the hearth. "You have come quickly, Monsieur Poirot." "I thank you." Poirot bowed slightly. "When one writes of death, madam, time becomes a luxury." As they seated themselves, Lady Helena drew a breath and began to speak. Her husband, Lord Alistair Crowhurst, had been found 3 nights ago beneath the west balcony, his skull fractured on the stones below. "He had gone out for air," she said quietly. "The servants heard nothing, no cry, no struggle. But I know my husband. He feared the height. He would never lean over that rail." Poirot listened intently, fingers pressed together beneath his chin. "And yet he fell," he murmured. "Was anyone with him that evening?" Lady Helena hesitated. Our guests had all retired.
Only my niece Clara was awake. She had heard footsteps in the corridor. but when she looked, no one was there. Hastings frowned.
Footsteps?
At that hour?
Lady Helena nodded, just before midnight, and when she peered from her room, she saw
Something.
a shadow moving toward the west balcony. Poirot's brows arched slightly. A shadow, you say? Yes, Lady Helena whispered, tall and cloaked, though the corridor was too dark to see clearly. By morning, Alistair was dead. Poirot rose from his chair and began to pace the length of the library. His gaze drifted across the shelves, the ornate mantelpiece, and finally to a glass cabinet filled with curious trinkets. Small silver ravens, each identical, each facing the same direction. He turned one slightly and examined the thin layer of dust beneath. "You are very fond of ravens in this house, madame," he said quietly. Lady Helena's expression darkened. "It is an old family symbol," she replied. "They say the first Crowhurst saved a raven from a storm centuries ago. Since then one has always nested near the hall. My husband believed it was a guardian spirit." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Or perhaps," he said, "a watcher." A knock at the door interrupted them. The butler entered, announcing that dinner was ready. As they moved toward the dining room, Poirot paused by the grand staircase, his eyes tracing the banister up to the shadowed landing above. The faintest sound, a creak, almost imperceptible, echoed from the upper floor. Hastings turned sharply.
"Did you hear that?"
Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, Hastings, the house is speaking again." Dinner at Raven Hall was a quiet affair. The guests, Lady Helena's niece Clara, her cousin Edmund Vale, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Grayson, sat in uneasy silence beneath the gaze of ancestral portraits. The candles flickered in their holders, casting the faces in alternating pools of light and shadow. Poirot observed them keenly, his little grey cells already stirring. Clara, a pale and nervous girl, avoided everyone's gaze. Edmund Vale, tall and stoic, toyed with his glass. Mrs. Grayson watched Poirot as though she wished he had never come. When the meal ended, Lady Helena excused herself, and the others dispersed quickly. Poirot and Hastings lingered in the corridor. "An unhappy household," Hastings murmured. "There's something strange about that cousin, and the girl looks terrified." Poirot nodded. "Yes, there is fear in this house, Hastings, but also guilt. It clings to these walls like the fog outside." As they climbed the stairs toward their rooms, the corridor fell into silence except for the faint ticking of a distant clock. Then a sound, soft, measured. The distinct rhythm of footsteps somewhere ahead, though no one was visible. Hastings froze. Poirot?" The detective lifted a hand for silence. The sound continued, closer now. Tap,
Tap, tap.
before fading abruptly at the end of the passage. Poirot's voice was calm, almost detached. "Footsteps in the fog, mon ami. But the fog is not outside tonight. It is within these walls." He moved toward the far end of the corridor, where a tall window overlooked the western terrace. The glass was misted, and upon it, faintly visible in the condensation, were 3 long streaks, like marks left by a gloved hand. Poirot regarded them silently for a long moment, then turned away. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we begin to ask questions. Tonight, we listen. For the house has much yet to tell." Chapter 3. The Raven's Cry at Midnight. The following morning dawned grey and bitter. The moorland shrouded in mist so dense it seemed to smother even the sound of the wind. Inside Raven Hall, the atmosphere was no less heavy. Poirot and Hastings joined Lady Helena in the breakfast room, where a single fire struggled against the chill. She looked weary, her eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. "Did you rest, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked. Poirot smiled faintly. "But of course, madame. Though the night was not without incident." Lady Helena stiffened. "You heard something?" Poirot inclined his head.
Footsteps, madame."
Soft, deliberate. In the upper corridor, near the west wing.
Tell me, who sleeps there?
She hesitated before replying. That would be Edmund's room, and beyond it, the one that was my husband's. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, then it is in the very place where death has already walked. After breakfast, Poirot insisted upon visiting the scene of the tragedy. The west balcony overlooked the misty expanse of the moors, its stone balustrades slick with dew. The drop below was steep, the ground uneven with jagged rocks. Poirot crouched, examining every inch of the railing, the floor, and the surrounding ledge. Hastings stood a few paces away, looking uneasy. Looks like a straightforward fall, if you ask me. Maybe he lost his balance. Poirot shook his head. Non, mon ami. The dust along the rail is undisturbed except for one small patch. There, see? A gloved hand, pressing, not leaning.
Someone held him.
Or pushed him. Hastings frowned. Then the murderer would have had to approach quietly, and at night. Poirot smiled. Yes, and with purpose. He straightened up, brushing his gloves.
Come, Hastings.
We shall see the bedroom next. The late Lord Crowhurst's chamber was grand but cold. Heavy curtains blocked the weak daylight, and the air smelled faintly of damp and old books. A half-burned candle stood by the bedside, its wax frozen mid-drip, as though time itself had halted at the moment of his death. Poirot moved about in silence, noting the details. A walking cane leaning against the desk, a half-written letter addressed to no one, a shattered porcelain cup near the hearth. He bent and picked up a fragment of the cup.
Tea, I think, he said softly, and perhaps laced with something unpleasant. Hastings' eyes widened. Poison?
Poirot only smiled.
Patience, mon ami.
One does not leap to conclusions until the facts form a pattern. As they left the room, they nearly collided with Clara Crowhurst, the niece. She looked pale as paper, her dark hair loose, her hands trembling as she clutched a small book.
I didn't know anyone was in there, she stammered.
Poirot bowed courteously. You were close to your uncle, mademoiselle? She nodded. He was kind to me.
But he was afraid.
The last week before he died, he said he kept hearing things. Footsteps in the corridor at night, whispers near the balcony. I told him it was just the wind, but he swore it wasn't. Poirot regarded her keenly.
And you? Have you heard these whispers too?
Her eyes flickered to the window.
Sometimes.
But last night it wasn't a whisper.
It was a cry, a raven's cry.
Just after midnight, the detective exchanged a glance with Hastings. And what did you do then? He asked. Clara hesitated. I went to look, but when I opened my door, I saw someone at the far end of the corridor, tall, dressed in black.
I thought it might be my cousin Edmund, but when I called his name, he didn't answer. He just vanished into the fog. Vanished? Poirot repeated softly. Or stepped into a room.
She shook her head.
I don't know. Everything was so still afterward. Poirot's gaze softened.
Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. Later that afternoon, Poirot and Hastings took a walk along the moor path beyond the house. The mist lifted in pale ribbons, revealing the bleak beauty of the landscape.
Do you believe the girl, Poirot?
Hastings asked. Entirely, Poirot said.
Fear sharpens memory.
It is those without fear whose words I distrust. He paused, stooping to pick up something glinting in the mud, a small piece of metal, tarnished but unmistakably ornate.
A cuff link, he murmured, turning it over. Engraved upon it was the letter E, Edmund?
Hastings asked. Poirot said nothing. He tucked the cufflink into his pocket and looked back toward the looming silhouette of Ravenhall. The house is like a stage, Hastings. Every player performs his part, but someone is writing the script. That night, the fog returned, thicker than before. The servants retired early, and an unnatural hush settled over the corridors. Poirot sat in the drawing-room, a single candle burning beside him, while Hastings dozed uneasily in a chair. Midnight approached. Somewhere above, a floorboard creaked. Poirot's head lifted. Then came another sound, faint, distant, yet distinct, the cry of a raven, sharp and mournful, echoing through the hall. Hastings stirred. "What was that?" Poirot rose. "The call of our witness, mon ami. Let us see what it wishes to show." They climbed the staircase, the candle flame trembling in Poirot's hand. The air was heavy with damp and the faint scent of smoke. As they reached the landing, the cry came again, nearer now, seeming to come from beyond the west corridor. Poirot advanced slowly, every sense alert. Then, from the shadows near the balcony door, a movement, a flicker of black cloth vanishing around the corner. Hastings lunged forward, but when they reached the spot, there was nothing, only an open window letting in the cold wind and the lingering echo of wings. Poirot knelt, examining the floor. There, caught in the crack between two boards, was a single black feather, glossy, unmistakably raven. He turned it over thoughtfully, then looked up at Hastings. "You see, mon ami," he said quietly, "the dead may be silent, but the living leave traces. Someone here wishes us to believe in ghosts."
"I, however, prefer to believe in murder." The candle guttered, the flame shrinking as the wind moaned through the corridor.
From far below, the grandfather clock struck 12, each chime sinking into the silence like a heartbeat. Poirot straightened, pocketing the feather. "Tomorrow we question them all," he murmured. "Tonight, the house itself has spoken." Chapter 4. Secrets. Beneath the portraits, morning came late to Raven Hall. The mist lingered long after dawn, wrapping the ancient house in its damp embrace. Down in the dining room the air was thick with unease. Lady Helena sat at the head of the table, stirring her tea without tasting it, while Edmund Vale read the newspaper in brooding silence. Clara, pale and nervous, kept her gaze fixed on her plate. Poirot entered quietly, Hastings close behind him, his expression crisp and unreadable. "Good morning, madame," Poirot greeted.
"I trust the night was calm?"
Lady Helena's hand trembled slightly. "As calm as this house allows," she said softly. Poirot inclined his head.
"Ah, then it speaks to us again."
"Ravenhall is a most talkative place." He seated himself, folding his napkin with precision. "If you permit, I would like to examine certain rooms today," he said. "The west corridor, particularly, and the gallery of portraits." Edmund looked up sharply. What could the old paintings possibly tell you? Poirot smiled faintly.
"Everything, monsieur."
"The dead, after all, have no reason to lie." Breakfast passed in tense silence. Edmund's eyes rarely left Poirot. Clara fidgeted with her spoon, avoiding everyone's gaze. When the meal ended, Poirot rose and announced, "Now, Hastings, let us go to the gallery. There are faces there that may yet speak." The portrait gallery stretched across the northern wing, a long, dim corridor lined with heavy gilt frames. The air smelled of varnish and age. Dust motes drifted in the beams of pale light filtering through the high windows. The Crowhurst ancestors stared down from their canvases, lords, ladies, soldiers, and judges, all severe, all shadowed by the same solemn pride. Hastings gave a low whistle. "Quite a collection," he muttered. "I wouldn't care to walk through here at night." Poirot walked slowly, his gloved fingers clasped behind his back.
"Every house tells its story, Hastings. And the portraits? They are its witnesses." He stopped before one, a tall man in dark robes, a silver raven pin gleaming on his chest.
The inscription below read, "Sir Tobias Crowhurst, 1631–1690. Poirot studied it closely. "The founder," he murmured. "Look at the eyes, Hastings. Sharp, watchful. A man who trusted nothing and no one." As they moved along the gallery, Poirot's gaze caught on a smaller portrait near the end, a woman with dark hair and haunted eyes. The nameplate was missing, the canvas slightly torn.
"Curious," he said softly. "And this one is out of alignment." He stepped closer, adjusting the frame, and froze.
Behind the portrait, a faint outline appeared on the wall, a small door almost invisible against the panelling. Hastings blinked.
A hidden passage.
Poirot's lips curved. Mais oui. And one that has not been used for some time. See the dust along the edges, but notice here the faint smudge of a hand. Someone has opened it recently. He pressed the edge of the frame, and with a faint click, the panel swung open to reveal a narrow, dark passageway descending into shadow. "Good Lord," Hastings whispered. "Where does it lead?" Poirot took a candle from the nearby stand and lit it. "Let us find out." The passage smelled of damp stone and decay. The walls were lined with cobwebs, and the steps descended steeply, twisting into darkness. Poirot's small flame flickered as they moved deeper, Hastings close behind. The sound of dripping water echoed faintly ahead. After a dozen steps, the passage widened into a small underground chamber, part cellar, part crypt. Old crates and broken furniture were scattered about, and on the far wall hung a faded tapestry, depicting, of all things, a raven perched atop a skull. Poirot examined the floor.
"Footprints," he murmured.
"Recent, and see here, candle wax. Someone has been meeting here, Hastings." Hastings frowned.
"Meeting? What for?"
Poirot knelt beside a wooden crate. Inside lay papers, old and brittle, tied with a black ribbon. He opened one carefully. "Letters," he said, from generations past. Correspondence about debts, scandals, perhaps worse. But here— He paused, pulling free a smaller envelope sealed with red wax. "This one is new." He broke the seal and read aloud. "It must be done before the investigator arrives. He knows too much already. The secret of Raven Hall cannot be allowed to surface again." Poirot's eyes glittered in the candlelight.
"Mon Dieu," he whispered.
"We are not the first to walk this passage in fear." Suddenly a faint sound echoed from above, a slow creak followed by the distinct thud of a door closing. Hastings started.
"Someone's up there."
Poirot motioned for silence, extinguishing the candle. They listened. Footsteps crossed the gallery floor, slow, deliberate, and directly above them. Then silence. When they finally emerged back into the corridor, the gallery was empty. But one detail caught Poirot's attention. The torn portrait of the dark-haired woman was gone. Only the nail remained in the wall, swinging slightly. Lady Helena appeared moments later, startled to see them. "Monsieur Poirot, what are you doing here?" she asked. Poirot's expression was serene. "Admiring your ancestors, madame, and the passage they so kindly concealed." Her face blanched.
"You found it?"
Poirot inclined his head. "Oui, and I suspect, madame, that your husband may have found it too, on the night he died." Her lips parted in shock.
"You mean—"
"I mean," Poirot said softly, "that someone feared what he might discover down there." A clock struck 3, its echo rippling through the house like a warning. Poirot turned toward the grand staircase, his eyes alight with thought. "Come, Hastings. The pieces begin to arrange themselves. We have ravens, secrets, and now a passage that leads to the heart of the truth." As they walked away, Lady Helena stood frozen in the gallery, her gaze fixed upon the empty space where the portrait had hung. Somewhere beyond the walls, faint and distant, came the harsh cry of a raven, a sound that made even the portrait seem to shiver in their gilded frames. Chapter 5. The disappearance of Clara. The next morning brought no sunlight to Raven Hall, only rain.
A steady drizzle beat against the windows, drumming like distant fingers upon the glass.
The sky hung low and sullen over the moors, and the air in the house seemed colder than before. Poirot, already awake, sat in the library sipping his chocolate, his sharp eyes scanning the Morning Post with methodical calm. Hastings entered, looking grave. "Poirot," he said quietly, "something's happened." "Clara's gone." Poirot did not look up immediately. "Gone, Hastings?" "Or taken. She's nowhere in the house, Hastings replied. The servants have searched every room. Her bed wasn't slept in, and Lady Helena's beside herself. Poirot folded his paper neatly. Then it begins, he murmured. Rising, he adjusted his tie, his expression grave but composed.
Come, mon ami, let us see what the night has stolen. They found Lady Helena in the main hall, pale and trembling, her hands clasped tightly around a handkerchief.
She was frightened yesterday, she whispered. I told her to stay close to her room, but she said she wanted air. That was before dinner.
No one has seen her since, Poirot nodded slowly.
You did not hear her return?
No, she said, but someone did, Mrs. Grayson, the housekeeper.
She said she heard footsteps in the corridor after midnight, quick, hurried, and a door closing softly near the west wing. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Always the west wing, he murmured. That corridor is the spine of this mystery. He and Hastings began their search at once. The rain outside made the halls dim and echoing. Poirot examined the carpets, the dust on the window-sills, the faint traces of movement that ordinary eyes would overlook. Near Clara's room he paused.
Observe, Hastings, are the prints here?
Small, feminine, and beside them, another set, heavier, booted, leading the same way. Hastings bent down. They go toward the gallery. Precisely, said Poirot. They followed the faint trail to the portrait gallery, where the light was grey and lifeless. The missing painting, the one of the dark-haired woman, had been replaced overnight by an empty frame draped in cloth. Poirot stood before it silently. Every absence, he said softly, is a message. He turned to the wall where the secret passage had been uncovered. The panel hung slightly ajar. Hastings's face tightened.
You think she went down there?
Poirot's tone was calm, almost gentle.
I think she was led there. They descended the narrow stairs once again, the candlelight flickering on the damp walls.
The air was colder than before, the scent of earth stronger. At the bottom, Poirot stopped. A single object lay on the ground near the old crates. Clara's brooch, its silver clasp, snapped in half. Hastings picked it up, grim-faced. She must have struggled. Poirot examined the floor. The footprints again, 2 sets. One small, one larger. And see here, Hastings. Scuff marks near the crates.
Something heavy was dragged. Dragged?
Hastings repeated. Good heavens, Poirot, you don't mean... Poirot raised a hand. No. Let us not conjure tragedy before its time. But yes, she was taken.
Alive, I think, though frightened.
The passage. It continues beyond the wall there. He pushed aside a wooden panel at the far end of the cellar, revealing a narrow stone tunnel extending into darkness. It leads beneath the house, Poirot said. Perhaps to another exit. We shall see where it ends, but not yet. Whoever took her may still be near. They returned upstairs to find Lady Helena pacing the drawing-room, Edmund standing grimly by the fire. You have found nothing? Edmund demanded. Poirot's gaze lingered on him a moment too long. We have found enough, he said softly. Enough to know she did not vanish of her own accord. Lady Helena's eyes filled with tears. But who would harm her? She was a child, harmless, sweet. Poirot's tone was quiet, but firm. A child, yes, but one who knew something. Perhaps something her uncle told her before his death. And perhaps, he added, that knowledge frightened someone. The hours dragged on. By afternoon, the rain turned to storm. Poirot walked through the gallery again, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes on the portraits. He stopped before the one of Sir Tobias Crowhurst. The founder, he murmured. The man who built this house, and I suspect the first to hide its sins. Hastings sighed. If Clara's still alive, where could she be? Poirot's eyes narrowed. Within the house, Hastings.
Always within.
The clever murderer never looks beyond his own cage. He builds it. That evening, Lady Helena called everyone to the library.
Clara must be found, she said, her voice breaking. If she's been taken, then the police must...
No, madame, Poirot interrupted gently. To call the police now would be to frighten the serpent back into its hole.
Allow me one more night. She hesitated, then nodded.
Very well. But if she's not found by morning— Poirot inclined his head. By morning, madame, I hope to know not only where she is but who has kept her there. When the household retired, Poirot remained awake. The rain had ceased, leaving the house wrapped in silence. He sat by the fire, eyes half closed, waiting. At last, a faint sound reached him, the slow creak of a board in the corridor above. He rose without haste, taking his candle, and followed. The sound moved steadily toward the west wing. Poirot's steps were noiseless. At the end of the corridor, the panel leading to the secret passage was ajar once more. He descended quietly, candle held high. At the bottom, the air stirred. A breath, a movement, and from the shadows came a voice, trembling and desperate. Monsieur Poirot? He raised the candle. There she was, Clara, pale and shivering, her hands bound but unharmed, crouched behind the crates. Her eyes were wide with terror.
He locked me down here, she whispered. He said no one would find me. Who, mademoiselle?
Poirot asked softly. But before she could answer, a sound thundered from above, the slam of a door, hurried footsteps retreating, and the echo of a man's voice fading into the storm. Poirot turned sharply.
Hastings, he called.
The raven has taken flight, and now we shall clip its wings. Chapter 6. The man in the black coat. The storm raged through the night, battering Raven Hall as if the heavens themselves demanded confession. Lightning flared across the windows, throwing tall shadows along the walls, and the old house groaned under the weight of wind and guilt alike. Poirot and Hastings had brought Clara safely to the library, where Lady Helena waited, her face ashen with worry. The girl clung to Poirot's arm, trembling. He locked me in the cellar, she whispered again.
I heard him speaking to someone, but I couldn't see who. He said
the detective must be stopped. Poirot placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Courage, mademoiselle. You are safe now. But you must tell us. Did you recognize his voice? She hesitated, glancing toward the door. It was dark, but—
I think it was Edmund, Lady Helena gasped, her hand flying to her throat.
My cousin?
That's impossible.
Poirot's gaze softened. No, madame, nothing is impossible. Merely inconvenient. Hastings, find Edmund at once. Hastings nodded and hurried out into the corridor. The thunder rolled as Poirot turned back to Lady Helena. Tell me, madam, your cousin has lived here long? Since childhood, she said faintly. He and my husband were raised together after their parents died.
Alistair always trusted him.
Perhaps too much. Poirot's expression sharpened. And what did they share besides blood and a name?
Secrets, perhaps.
Before Lady Helena could answer, Hastings returned, breathless.
Poirot, he's gone.
His room's empty, the window open. There are footprints on the terrace, leading toward the moor. Poirot's eyes gleamed.
Then my friend the raven has taken wing.
We must follow. They armed themselves with lanterns and cloaks, stepping out into the tempest. The wind tore at their coats, and rain stung their faces as they crossed the sodden grounds. The lanterns flickered wildly, barely holding against the darkness. Hastings shouted above the storm. Where do you think he's headed? Poirot's voice carried, calm and sure. Towards safety, Hastings, or what he imagines is safety. There are ruins beyond the North Ridge, the old Crowhurst Chapel. If he fears discovery, that is where he will hide. They followed the trail through mud and bracken, the moor stretching endlessly around them. The lightning flashed again, revealing a figure in the distance. Tall, cloaked, the black coat whipping in the wind. Hastings pointed. There, by the ridge. Poirot's stride quickened.
Do not lose sight of him.
They climbed the incline, the rain turning the earth slick beneath their boots. The figure stumbled, turned once, and for an instant the lightning illuminated his face. It was Edmund Vale, his eyes burned with panic, his features twisted in terror rather than guilt. Then he turned, and vanished into the ruins. Inside the crumbling chapel, the wind howled through broken stained glass. Candles burned low on the stone altar, half melted. Someone had been here often. Poirot raised his lantern. See, Hastings? He has kept a vigil of his own. Footsteps echoed suddenly behind them. Edmund stood at the far end of the chapel, his coat soaked, his expression haunted.
"Stay back!" he cried. "You don't understand. You can't."
Poirot's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Then make me understand, monsieur. Tell me why you would imprison your cousin. Why you run when no one has yet accused you?" Edmund's hand trembled. "Because it wasn't meant to happen this way."
Alistair, he found out. Found out what?
Poirot asked softly. Edmund's eyes darted toward the altar, where a bundle of papers lay half buried beneath dust and wax. "The letters," he said hoarsely. "The truth about the Crowhurst fortune. He was going to expose it, destroy everything. And so you killed him," Hastings said grimly. "No," Edmund shouted, the word echoing off the stone.
"I didn't kill him." "I only meant to frighten him, to make him see reason."
"But when I came back that night, he was already dead." His voice cracked. "The feather, that was his doing. He wanted to leave behind a symbol, to curse this family with its own sins." Poirot's gaze was steady. "And you believed the curse had come for you next?" Edmund sank to his knees. He was right. "The Crowhursts are damned, everyone. You'll see, Poirot. You'll see it yourself." Before Poirot could reply, a shadow moved in the doorway. Another man, tall and broad-shouldered, his face hidden beneath the brim of a black hat. He raised a pistol, its metal gleaming in the lantern light. "No one will see anything," he said. His voice was cold, measured, and unfamiliar. Hastings froze.
"Good God!" Poirot stepped forward, hands raised.
"You, monsieur, must be the one who hides behind every tragedy." "The unseen hand?" the man sneered.
Clever little Belgian.
"Always poking where you shouldn't. Lord Crowhurst's death was justice. The family built its fortune on betrayal, and I will see it end." "Then you are not of the family?" Poirot said softly. "No," the man replied, "but I was once part of its shadow." He fired. The shot cracked through the chapel like thunder. Poirot ducked aside as the bullet splintered the altar. Hastings lunged forward, tackling the man's arm. The pistol fell clattering across the stone floor. A struggle ensued, brief, violent, before Hastings and Poirot subdued him. When the lantern light fell full upon his face, Lady Helena's butler, Mr. Graves, lay gasping beneath their grip. Poirot's voice was quiet.
"Of course."
"The servant who sees all, hears all, and is forgotten by all."
"How fitting." Graves glared up at him.
"You don't know what they did. You think this house deserves saving? The Crowhursts destroyed lives to build their empire."
"I only finished what they began." Poirot regarded him coolly.
"And so you hid behind superstition, behind the raven and the fog, while you murdered in the name of righteousness." "Très poétique, but no less cruel," Graves laughed bitterly.
You can't prove anything." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Ah, but I can."
"You left traces, monsieur. The wax from your own candles in the secret passage, the glove prints on the balcony rail, and the feather you placed as your calling card. You even used Edmund as your scapegoat. You played your role well. But the curtain must fall." The butler's expression faltered. "You'll hang me, then?" Poirot shook his head.
"No, it is justice who will hang you."
"I merely opened the door for her." As dawn broke, the storm finally passed. The chapel stood silent once more, save for the cry of a raven circling high above. Poirot watched it disappear into the grey light. Hastings turned to him. "So it was the butler after all?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, mon ami, in England it is always the butler." But this time, for once, it was also the truth. He turned toward the horizon, where the first weak rays of morning touched the moor.
"Come, Hastings."
"Ravenhall has seen enough of death. Now it must learn to live again." Chapter 7. The confession in the rain. The dawn broke pale and uncertain over the moors, a soft drizzle falling like a veil over Raven Hall. The house stood in uneasy silence, its windows gleaming dully in the grey light. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered in the corridors, whispers of fear, betrayal, and things best left unsaid. Poirot, immaculate as ever despite the night's ordeal, sat by the fire in the library, his hands folded neatly upon his knees. Opposite him, the captured butler, Graves, sat rigid in a high-backed chair, his wet coat clinging to his frame. His eyes, dark and hollow, betrayed neither remorse nor fear, only exhaustion. Lady Helena stood near the window, her face pale and drawn.
"I cannot believe it," she murmured.
"Graves, you have served this family for 30 years. Graves's lips twisted faintly. "A lifetime spent serving liars and thieves, my lady."
"I saw what your husband did."
"What his father did. The Crowhurst legacy is not one of honour. It is one of blood." Poirot tilted his head, studying him.
"And so you became judge, jury, and executioner, eh?"
"That is a heavy burden for a servant to bear." Graves's voice rose, trembling with bitterness.
"He found the letters."
Lord Crowhurst was going to expose everything, the bribes, the smuggling, the deaths buried in the family's history. He thought he could cleanse the name, but all he would have done is ruin those who still lived. The estate, the servants, everyone would have suffered.
"I only meant to stop him," Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And yet, monsieur, you stopped him forever." Graves's composure faltered. "It was an accident. I swear it."
We argued on the balcony.
"He threatened to cast me out, to tell the police. I tried to make him listen. I caught his arm and he broke off, pressing his hands to his face. He fell, the raven feather. That was my mistake. I wanted to make it look as if the curse had claimed him." Hastings, standing by the hearth, looked shaken.
Then all of this, the letters, the secret passages, Clara's abduction, it was all to cover up a moment of panic. Graves's eyes lifted slowly.
"Panic and guilt."
"I thought if I could frighten you all, keep the truth buried, it would end here. But Poirot, he sees too much. Always too much." Poirot said nothing for a long while. Then he rose, adjusting his cufflinks with slow precision. "Non, monsieur. I see only what others hide too well. The truth, like a stain, seeps through even the finest silk." The rain thickened against the windows. Lady Helena turned toward him, her voice trembling.
"Monsieur Poirot, what will become of him?"
He looked at her with quiet sympathy. "The law, madame, must have its way. It is not vengeance, but balance." At that moment, a carriage arrived from the village. The local constable and 2 officers stepping through the great doors. Poirot handed over the damning evidence, the wax-stained letters, the gloves marked with residue from the balcony railing, and the revolver retrieved from the chapel floor. Graves did not resist as they took him away. He merely glanced back once, his voice hoarse.
"You think this house is clean now?"
"You're wrong. The sins of Raven Hall don't die. They only sleep." Poirot watched him go. For a moment, only the rain spoke, whispering against the glass like a confession. Then softly, Poirot said, "He's not wrong."
"A house such as this does not forget."
"But perhaps, madame, it can forgive." Lady Helena turned to him, eyes wet.
"And what of the others? Of Edmund, of Clara?" "Edmund is innocent," Poirot replied.
"Merely a frightened man caught in another's design. As for Mademoiselle Clara, she has courage, though she knows it not. She will heal." Hastings, ever the man of feeling, exhaled deeply. "And you, Poirot, what will you do now?" Poirot smiled faintly.
"Ah, mon ami, I will have my breakfast."
"Murder is exhausting even for the little grey cells." They shared a quiet laugh, though the sound was fragile, almost reluctant. Poirot moved to the window, watching as the constable's carriage disappeared into the mist. Beyond the gates, the moors stretched endless and empty, save for a single black shape circling above. A raven, calling mournfully through the drizzle. "Listen, Hastings," Poirot murmured. "It calls again." Hastings frowned. "You don't believe in curses, do you?" Poirot's eyes glimmered with a strange light. "Non, mon ami, but I believe in memory, and memory, like the raven, always returns to the place of death." The rain fell harder, blurring the world beyond the glass. Inside Raven Hall, the fire burned low, casting flickering shadows upon the portraits. The faces of the dead seemed to shift and shimmer in the light, watching, waiting, as though they too longed to confess. Poirot turned away at last, smoothing his moustache with delicate care. "Come, Hastings," he said softly. "Let us leave the shadows to their own company. We have seen enough ghosts for one lifetime." And as they walked down the long corridor toward the great doors, the raven's cry echoed once more through the rain, a sound both mournful and final, as if the house itself was whispering merci et adieu. Chapter 8. The Hidden Ledger. The rain had eased by the following day, leaving the moors slick and shining under a colourless sky. Ravenhall, though calmer, still carried the uneasy silence of a house that had confessed only part of its sins. Poirot rose early. Sleep, as ever, had been brief. He found Lady Helena in the library, the fire newly kindled, the scent of damp wood heavy in the air. She was staring at her husband's portrait, the late Lord Crowhurst, looking down in stern judgment from his gilded frame. Poirot approached quietly. "You are haunted, madame," he said, "but not by the dead man, by the things he did not tell you." She turned, weary but resolute. "You're right, Monsieur Poirot. There are still things I don't understand. Graves spoke of letters, of secrets in the family's fortune."
Alistair never told me anything of that.
"What did he mean?" Poirot's eyes drifted to the massive oak desk at the centre of the room. "A man who hides a sin hides it close, madame, near to where he thinks himself most secure." He began opening drawers.
One after another, papers neatly stacked, accounts balanced.
Correspondence ordered with the precision of a banker. Yet something felt too precise, too deliberate. Poirot's fingers traced the inner edge of the lowest drawer until he found it, a faint ridge. With a small click, a hidden compartment slid free. Inside lay a leather-bound ledger, its cover cracked, its brass clasp dark with age. Lady Helena drew in a sharp breath. "I have never seen that before." Poirot set the ledger upon the desk, opening it with care. The pages were filled with names, dates, and sums written in the elegant hand of Lord Crowhurst. But the column headings told the tale: shipments, payments, special arrangements. And at the bottom of one page, an entry circled twice in red ink: Raven Hall, account of Tobias Crowhurst, 1648. Hastings entered then, drying his boots from the wet grass outside. "What have you found now, Poirot?" "A record, mon ami," Poirot replied. "The true inheritance of this family, guilt measured in pounds and shillings." He turned several pages, his brows knitting tighter. The entries stretched back centuries, references to cargo unlisted, deliveries through Whitby Bay, and foreign labour. Lady Helena's hand trembled as she read.
These are smuggling accounts," Poirot nodded.
"Smuggling, and perhaps worse. There are mentions of bribes to magistrates, of disappearances paid for in silence. The first Crowhurst did not build his fortune upon trade, but upon contraband, and it appears his descendants continued the enterprise until only a generation ago." Hastings looked grim. "And Lord Crowhurst discovered this?" "Oui, and he sought to end it. But our friend Graves feared the truth would destroy the estate's reputation, so he silenced the one man who wished to make peace with the past." Poirot closed the ledger gently.
"And thus history devoured itself." Lady Helena sank into the nearest chair, her voice barely above a whisper.
"So the curse was real, not of spirits, but of conscience." Poirot inclined his head. Indeed. The raven was never a phantom, it was a symbol, a warning carried through generations. Each Crowhurst who ignored it brought ruin upon the next. He rose, walking toward the window. Outside the clouds were parting, thin rays of sunlight touching the wet grass. "Madame, you have a choice now," he said softly, "to bury this book once more or to let it speak. The sins of the dead cannot be undone, but truth, truth, has its own form of mercy." For a long moment, Lady Helena was silent. Then she reached out, resting a hand upon the ledger. "It will be opened," she said. "The world will know. I would rather bear shame than live on a lie." Poirot smiled faintly. "You have courage, madame. It is not an easy thing to end a family's shadow." A knock came at the door. Clara entered, pale but composed, a letter in her hand. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "this arrived for you just now. No name, only the seal." Poirot took it, noting the familiar crimson wax, again marked with the raven's wing. Breaking it open, he read aloud, "You think the story is finished. It has only changed its mask. There was no signature." Hastings frowned.
"Another threat?"
Poirot folded the letter carefully, tucking it into his pocket. Perhaps a reminder that evil, like the fog, never truly leaves. It merely retreats until the next chill. He turned back to Lady Helena and Clara, his expression calm but eyes thoughtful. "For now, the ledger is yours. Guard it well, and beware those who may still covet what it conceals." Outside, a raven wheeled through the clearing sky, its cry echoing over the moors. Poirot watched it until it vanished into the distance. "Ah," he murmured, "Ravenhall breathes again. But its heart will take longer to heal." Chapter 9. The visitor from Whitby. 2 days passed since the discovery of the hidden ledger, and Ravenhall had grown strangely still, like a theatre after the final act, when the curtain has fallen, but the echoes of the drama linger in the dark. Poirot remained as a guest at Lady Helena's request, quietly sorting through papers and letters in the library. Hastings, meanwhile, had developed a fascination for the coastal paths and the village beyond, where whispers of the Crowhurst name were spoken in half voices. That morning, the butler's absence had left the household unsettled, and a replacement had been sent for from the nearby town. It was near noon when a knock sounded at the great doors, 3 sharp raps that broke the silence like a gavel. A servant opened them to reveal a tall man in a sea-worn coat, his boots crusted with salt, his hat dripping from the rain. His face was lean, his eyes sharp and cold as the northern tide. "I've come for Monsieur Poirot," he said simply. "Name's Daniel Kersey, from Whitby Bay." Poirot looked up from his desk as the stranger was shown in.
"Ah," he said pleasantly, "from the coast."
"A place of fishermen and smugglers, yes? What brings you so far inland, monsieur?" Kersey removed his hat, his gaze flicking between Poirot and Lady Helena, who had entered moments earlier. "I heard there's been talk of the Crowhurst ledger," he said. "It don't belong here. It belongs to the sea, to those who died bringing that fortune ashore." Lady Helena stiffened. "You knew of it?" "Aye," Kersey replied grimly. "My grandfather worked their ships. He carried their cargo, as they called it, until one night the cargo turned to bodies. They left him to rot in the tide for knowing too much." His voice lowered, dark and steady. "The Crowhursts built Ravenhall with blood money. You found proof of that, didn't you?" Poirot regarded him with calm interest. "You are a man of justice, monsieur?"
"I'm a man of debt," Kersey said.
"And the sea don't forget what's owed." Poirot gestured to the desk. "Then you may be pleased to learn that the truth has already surfaced. The ledger will be handed to the authorities. The past, monsieur, is no longer a secret." But Kersey shook his head.
"You don't understand. That book's a curse."
"You hand it over, and every name in it, every man who profited, will burn for it. And not all of them are dead." Lady Helena's expression darkened.
"Are you threatening me?" No, my lady, Kersey said quietly. I'm warning you.
There's men in Whitby who've waited 40 years to make sure that Ledger never sees daylight again. If they know you've got it. He let the words hang in the air, like the echo of a wave receding into silence. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet you have come here to warn us instead of them. Why, monsieur? Kersey hesitated, then sighed. Because I made my peace with the dead long ago. But I won't see another fall to the same shadow. He looked to Poirot. Burn it! That's the only way to end it. Poirot stood, hands clasped behind his back, studying the man closely. You are sincere. But sincerity is not the same as truth. If this ledger has survived centuries of deceit, perhaps it is meant to be seen, to cleanse, not destroy. Kersey gave a bitter laugh. Cleansing don't come cheap. You think justice cares for the innocent? Once the names in that book are known, others will come. Men you've never heard of, with knives and money and long memories. You'll damn the living to pay for the dead. At that, a distant sound interrupted them. The hollow knock of carriage wheels upon gravel. Hastings, who had been watching from the window, turned sharply. Poirot, someone else is coming. Outside, a black carriage pulled up before the hall. Two men in dark coats stepped out, one of them carrying a leather satchel.
Officials, Hastings said uncertainly.
From the magistrate's office, perhaps? Poirot's gaze flickered to Kersey. The man's jaw tightened.
They're not magistrates, he muttered.
They're from Whitby. The front doors opened again, and the two strangers entered without greeting. Monsieur Poirot, said the taller one smoothly, we understand you've come into possession of certain documents belonging to the late Lord Crowhurst. We're here to collect them. Poirot's tone remained mild.
Indeed, and whom do you represent, monsieur?
Let us say, the remaining parties concerned. Lady Helena drew back. You have no authority here, the man smiled faintly. Authority is a fragile thing, my lady, like glass. It shatters easily. Kersey stepped forward. You lay a hand on that book and I'll put you back in the sea where you belong. For a moment, tension crackled in the air like the storm reborn. Poirot raised a hand, his calm cutting through the menace. Gentlemen, please. Violence is the language of those without imagination. Let us speak as men of reason. He turned toward the desk and found the ledger gone. The space where it had rested was bare. Poirot froze, his expression unreadable. Hastings looked around in shock.
It was right there.
Lady Helena's face went white.
Clara,
she gasped.
She was here not 10 minutes ago.
Kersey swore under his breath. Then they're already moving. The girl's taken it. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind already racing. No, monsieur. She has not taken it. She has hidden it. Somewhere no man of greed would ever look. He strode to the window, scanning the drenched landscape beyond. A faint shimmer of movement caught his eye. A figure running toward the old cliffside path that led to the sea. Clara Poirot turned sharply to Hastings.
Quickly, mon ami, to the coast.
If she reaches the bay before they do, the tide may yet keep her secret safe. Outside, thunder rolled once more over the distant waves. Ravenhall stood silent behind them as they ran, its windows staring blankly toward the moors, watching as the next shadow of its long curse moved toward the sea. Chapter 10. The cliff of secrets, the wind off the North Sea, howled like a living thing, carrying the sting of salt and the cries of distant gulls. Grey waves crashed against the cliffs of Whitby Bay, throwing spray high into the air. On the narrow path above, a lone figure hurried through the mist. Clara Crowhurst, her skirts whipping about her legs, one hand clutching the leather-bound ledger tight to her chest. Behind her, faint and relentless, came the echo of pursuit. Poirot and Hastings reached the coastal ridge moments later, lanterns swinging wildly in the gale. Kersey followed close behind, his coat flapping like a torn sail. The air reeked of brine and rain, and the path beneath their feet turned treacherous with slick stone and mud. Hastings shouted against the wind, "There! Poirot, she's just ahead." Indeed, through the shifting fog they saw her, a small, pale figure standing dangerously close to the cliff's edge. Clara turned at the sound of their voices, and froze as two other shapes emerged from the mist behind her. The men from Whitby. Their black coats billowed in the wind, and one of them called out coldly, "Hand it over, girl."
"No harm need come to you."
Poirot raised his voice above the surf.
"Mademoiselle, do not move! The ground beneath you, it is unstable."
But Clara clutched the ledger tighter, her eyes wild with fear.
"They can't have it," she cried. "If I destroy it, none of this will matter."
Poirot took a cautious step forward. "No, mademoiselle, listen to me. Destruction does not erase evil. It only buries it deeper."
"Let truth live, and it will protect you."
The taller of the two men lunged forward, but Kersey intercepted him with a shout, grappling on the slick rocks. The other drew a knife, flashing silver in the weak light. Hastings sprang toward him, but the man slashed, grazing Hastings's arm. Poirot moved swiftly, seizing a broken branch from the path and striking the assailant's wrist with surprising precision. The knife fell, clattering down the cliff face and vanishing into the roaring sea below. "Enough!" Poirot thundered, his voice cutting through the storm like a command from heaven itself. "You would kill again for paper and ink? For the sins of dead men?"
"Cowards!"
For a heartbeat, even the wind seemed to still. The taller man broke free from Kersey's grip, panting, his coat torn.
"You don't understand," he spat.
"That ledger, it names them all, not just the Crowhursts. Men who still walk free. Men who'd kill us all to keep it quiet." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Then you, monsieur, are merely another pawn in their long game of silence." Clara stood trembling at the edge. The mist thinned, revealing the dizzying drop, the black waters surging below.
"If they take it, they'll never stop," she whispered.
More deaths, more lies.
"I can end it now." Poirot stepped closer, his voice low but clear. "Mademoiselle, you have courage, but you are young.
You wish to cleanse your family's name, not condemn it. To destroy this ledger is to destroy your uncle's final act of repentance. Do not do to him in death what others did to him in life." Her grip loosened slightly. "But what if they come again?" "Then," said Poirot softly, "they will find me waiting." Behind them, Kersey had subdued one of the men, his face bleeding but resolute. The other, defeated, slumped against a rock, his fury spent.
"You'll never keep it safe," he growled.
"There are others, higher, richer. They own half of Whitby's coast, and they won't forgive exposure." Poirot looked at him coolly. "Then perhaps they should fear it." He turned to Clara and held out his hand. "Give me the book, mademoiselle. Let truth fall to the law, not the sea." For a long moment Clara's gaze wavered between him and the dark waves below. Then, slowly, she stepped forward and placed the ledger into his waiting hands. Poirot bowed his head slightly as though receiving a sacred relic. The moment broke when a sudden rumble shook the ground. The cliff, weakened by rain, began to crumble beneath them.
"Back!" Hastings shouted.
Kersey grabbed Clara, pulling her away as the edge gave way, a section of earth collapsing into the sea with a roar. Spray and debris burst upward, soaking them all. Poirot staggered but held firm, clutching the ledger close beneath his coat. When at last the sound faded, the three men from Whitby were gone, swallowed by the storm, their fate sealed in the churning waters below. For several minutes no one spoke. The wind eased, the surf roaring distantly. Poirot straightened his hat and looked out across the grey horizon. "So ends the chapter written in blood and tide," he said quietly. Hastings, panting beside him, nodded toward the ruined edge.
"Good Lord, Poirot."
"That was nearly the end of us too," Poirot smiled faintly. "But non, mon ami, the sea may take the wicked, but it has no appetite for the curious." They made their way back toward Raven Hall, weary but alive. The fog lifted gradually, revealing the moor in its desolate beauty. Lady Helena stood waiting at the gates, her black shawl fluttering in the wind. When Clara ran into her arms, she wept silently, holding her close. Poirot approached, presenting the ledger. "It is done, madam," he said. "The sea demanded one truth, and justice another. Between them, I think your house is finally free." Lady Helena took the book, her hands trembling. "And what will you do now, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot smiled, his eyes glinting in the pale afternoon light.
"Ah, madame, a little rest, perhaps.
And then perhaps another mystery. The world, you see, never tires of shadows." As they turned away, a raven passed overhead, its cry echoing across the cliffs. Not mournful this time, but clear, sharp, and free. Poirot paused, tipping his hat toward it.
"Adieu, mon ami," he murmured.
"Even a shadow may find the light again." And with that, the great detective walked on, the mist curling gently behind him like the closing page of a story that refused to be forgotten. Chapter 11. The Return to London. The journey back to London was cloaked in grey drizzle, the countryside sliding past in muted shades of green and brown. The storm had finally passed, yet a strange heaviness lingered in the air. The calm that follows confession when silence feels louder than any scream. Poirot sat in the corner of the railway carriage, immaculate as always, his small suitcase beside him, and the ledger now safely sealed within a brown envelope. Hastings sat opposite, nursing a bandaged arm and a mind full of unanswered questions. For a long while they travelled in silence, the rhythm of the train filling the space between them. At last, Hastings broke it. "Well, Poirot, I must say, but I've seen many strange things with you, but this business at Raven Hall takes the prize. A cursed family, secret passages, hidden books, and the sea itself playing executioner." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, mon ami, the English have a remarkable gift to clothe wickedness in dignity and tragedy in decorum. Raven Hall is but one more example of such artistry." Hastings leaned forward. "Still, I can't quite fit it all together."
"You knew it was Graves, but what gave him away?"
Poirot opened one eye lazily. "It was his shoes, Hastings."
"Always the shoes."
"When we first arrived, I noticed the mud upon them, thick, dark, and of a kind found only near the west balcony. Yet he claimed never to have left the kitchens that night. And then the candle wax in the secret passage was of a peculiar scent, clove and bay leaf used only by the staff. Add to that his eagerness to offer information without being asked, and voila. The conscience of the guilty man revealed itself through excessive helpfulness." Hastings shook his head in amazement. "Good heavens, Poirot, you see murder in a footprint and motive in a whiff of candle wax." Poirot chuckled softly. "Non, mon ami.
"I see human nature."
The clues, they are merely the reflections." He reached into his pocket, drawing out the crimson-sealed letter that had arrived the day before the Whitby men appeared.
"Ed, but tell me, Hastings, who do you suppose sent this?"
Hastings frowned. "You mean the warning?"
"You think the story is finished, has only changed its mask?" "I assumed one of those men." Poirot shook his head.
No, the phrasing was too refined, the penmanship educated.
"No, this came from someone much closer. Someone within the Crowhurst circle." Hastings blinked.
"Lady Helena?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. No, she would not write to herself. It was Edmund Vale. You recall his sudden desire to leave the hall after Graves's arrest? He feared that once the ledger was found, his own financial dealings might come to light. His motives were not murderous, merely
Inconvenient. Hastings sat back, absorbing this.
"So he wanted to frighten us away." "Precisely," Poirot said. "But he lacked the courage to act upon it. The true evil, Hastings, lies not in passion, but in apathy, in the quiet acceptance of wrongdoing for one's own comfort. Graves killed from fear. Edmund concealed from pride. Both are children of the same sin." The train clattered across an iron bridge, the river below flashing silver in the light. Poirot gazed out the window. "Do you remember, Hastings, how Lady Helena spoke of cleansing her family's name? She believed confession would end the curse. But curses, mon ami, are not born of superstition. They are born of secrets." Hastings smiled ruefully. "Well, I suppose the Crowhursts are free of theirs now. The truth's out, the guilty caught, and the ledger in safe hands." Poirot's expression turned thoughtful. "Perhaps. Yet the greatest mystery of Raven Hall remains unsolved." Hastings blinked. "What do you mean?" Poirot turned from the window, his eyes alight with that familiar, teasing glimmer. "The Raven, Hastings. It appeared whenever truth was near. At the balcony, at the gallery, and upon the cliff. 3 times like the herald of revelation. Do you recall what Lady Helena said of the legend? That the first Crowhurst saved a raven from a storm, and it became the family's guardian?" "Yes," said Hastings. "But surely that's just folklore." Poirot smiled. "Of course. Yet in every legend there is a truth wrapped in poetry. The raven was not the curse, it was the conscience. Perhaps it was never a bird at all, but a reminder that even in darkness the truth finds its wings." Hastings looked at him with a mix of awe and affection.
You really believe that, don't you?
Poirot straightened his tie. "Mais oui."
"I've seen too many men destroyed by the lies they tell themselves."
"The raven, mon ami, is simply what remains when the lies are gone." As the train slowed toward London, the clouds parted briefly, revealing a faint gleam of sun. The city's rooftops came into view, chimneys, steeples, and the thin trails of smoke rising from a world that had not yet learned from its mysteries. Poirot gathered his things, brushing an invisible speck from his immaculate sleeve. "Well, Hastings," he said, standing, "we return to civilization, where the crimes are smaller, but the sinners no less imaginative." Hastings laughed.
"And I suppose you'll want a quiet supper to recover from this adventure?"
"Indeed," said Poirot. "But first—"
"A visit to Scotland Yard. There are still questions to ask, and perhaps one final truth to uncover." As they stepped down onto the platform,
the noise of London wrapped around them, the familiar hum of carriages, the distant cry of a newsboy, the whistle of departing trains. Poirot paused for a moment, glancing back at the grey horizon beyond the station. Somewhere far away, over the moors and cliffs, a raven might still be flying. He smiled faintly and whispered, "Fly well, mon ami. You have done your duty." Then turning to Hastings, he added cheerfully, "Come, mon ami, to breakfast, and then perhaps to another case. The shadows never rest for long." And with that, the two friends vanished into the crowd, leaving behind the echo of rain, a sealed ledger, and the faintest memory of a black wing gliding over the sea. Chapter 12. The Raven's last flight a week had passed since Poirot and Hastings left the grey moors of Yorkshire behind, yet the shadow of Raven Hall had not quite lifted. London, for all its noise and smoke, seemed subdued to Poirot that week. The streets too ordinary, the people too hurried. Even the order of his small flat in Whitehaven Mansions brought him no peace. The ledger from Raven Hall, now sealed and sent to Scotland Yard, had become a matter of national curiosity. The newspapers spoke of a century of deceit, of noble corruption unmasked, and of the foreign sleuth who cleansed a family's curse. But Hercule Poirot, despite the world's applause, was restless. There was something in the Raven Hall affair that did not fit neatly into the pattern of truth. Something small, perhaps. Yet to Poirot the smallest thing was always the key to the greatest mystery. That morning a soft knock sounded at his door. Hastings entered, carrying the Times and a look of cautious excitement. "Poirot, you'll want to see this. It's about Lady Helena." Poirot took the paper, unfolding it with delicate precision. The headline read, "Lady Helena Crowhurst dead in apparent accident. Fall from balcony at Raven Hall." For a long moment, Poirot said nothing. The room seemed to contract around the words. Then he spoke softly, almost to himself. Encore une fois. The balcony, Hastings frowned.
It says she slipped. The constable reports no sign of foul play.
She'd returned to the hall to settle affairs. Poirot's expression was unreadable, and she fell from the same balcony where her husband died. Mon Dieu, Hastings, do you not see? Fate does not repeat itself. People do. Within hours, they were once again on the train to Yorkshire. The sky was overcast, the moors a blurred smear of greys and greens beyond the window. As they approached the familiar outline of Raven Hall, Hastings shivered. Feels different now, doesn't it? Quieter. Like the place has finally stopped pretending. The housekeeper, Mrs. Grayson, met them at the door, her face pale, her hands shaking. She'd been strange since the men from the magistrate left, she said. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. Spent all her time in the library reading that cursed ledger before it was taken away. I told her to rest, but she said she had to see it through. And last night, she went out to the balcony alone. Poirot nodded gravely.
And you heard nothing? Only the raven, Mrs. Grayson whispered.
It's been here again, circling the tower since dawn. Inside, the library remained just as Poirot remembered, except for one thing. Upon the desk, beneath a paperweight shaped like a raven, lay an envelope addressed in Lady Helena's hand, to Monsieur Hercule Poirot, in the event of my death. Poirot broke the seal with slow precision and began to read aloud. Monsieur Poirot, you told me once that truth brings mercy. I have tried to believe it. But each page of that ledger screamed of names I knew, of people still living, still powerful. The Crowhurst wealth was not built by the dead alone. If I expose them, I destroy the families that depend upon them. If I remain silent, I become one of them. Perhaps the raven comes not for guilt, but for choice, and I can bear neither. Forgive me, for I'm tired. Tell Clara to live free of this house. Let her never look upon these walls again. Helena Crowhurst. Hastings's voice was hushed. So she took her own life? Poirot set the letter down, shaking his head slowly. No, Hastings, the words are weary, yes, but not despairing. They are deliberate, reflective, a woman preparing to act, not to die. No, mon ami, Lady Helena did not throw herself. She was pushed. Hastings' eyes widened. Pushed? But by whom? Poirot turned toward the window, where the grey light flickered across the floor. Who indeed? Tell me, Hastings, who would gain most by her silence now that the ledger is in official hands? Understanding dawned slowly in Hastings' face. Clara. Poirot nodded gravely. Oui, Mademoiselle Clara, the innocent we all pitied. She returned with her aunt that night, did she not? She knew where the ledger was kept, and perhaps she knew one name inside it that she could never allow to surface. He crossed to the fireplace and retrieved a small scrap of paper from the ashes. Only one word remained legible. Vale. Edmund Vale, Poirot murmured. The cousin. A quiet alliance. Perhaps a promise of inheritance, or more. And Lady Helena, upon learning this, confronted her niece. That, Hastings, was her last conversation. Hastings stared in shock. You think Clara killed her own aunt? Poirot sighed, his expression filled with melancholy. She has inherited the truest Crowhurst legacy, not wealth, not pride, but fear, the fear of losing everything built upon deceit. At that moment, a shadow crossed the window. Poirot looked up and saw it. The raven, black as ink, perched upon the balcony rail. It stared through the glass, head tilted, wings wet with rain. Then, with a single sharp cry, it took flight into the clouds. Poirot stood for a long time in silence. Finally, he said softly, There is your witness, Hastings. The raven flies only when the truth has nowhere left to hide. He turned from the window, his face calm, but his eyes distant. We shall not pursue the girl. The law may find her, or time may. For me, the case ends here. Hastings looked pained. But Poirot, after all that? Poirot placed a gentle hand on his friend's shoulder. My dear Hastings, justice is not always the same as peace. The one may be served, but the other must be earned. As they left Ravenhall for the final time, the rain began again, soft, ceaseless, like the murmuring of old secrets. Poirot paused once at the gate and looked back. The house loomed in, the mist, its windows dark, its shadow stretching long across the moor. He whispered, almost to himself, "The raven has flown, but its shadow remains." And with that, Hercule Poirot turned toward London, his small frame straight against the wind, the last keeper of a secret too human, too tragic, and too true to ever fully die. Chapter 13. The Whispering. Gallery. London returned to its usual rhythm, the rattle of carriages, the scent of coal smoke, the distant tolling of church bells. But to Poirot the city felt different. He had brought the Ravenhall case to its conclusion, yet a part of him remained upon those mist-drowned moors. The faces of the Crowhursts haunted his thoughts. Alistair's weary eyes, Helena's trembling hands, Clara's frightened innocence, concealing a darker courage. 3 days after his return, Poirot received an invitation from Scotland Yard. Inspector Japp awaited him in the great marble hall of the Yard's archive wing, a place of echoing footsteps and shelves heavy with evidence. The detective greeted him warmly, but his smile was grave. "You've stirred up quite a storm, Poirot."
That ledger's blown half of Yorkshire's gentry into scandal, but there's something else. We found a letter among the documents. One addressed to you. It was sealed with that raven mark again. Poirot took the envelope silently. The same crimson wax.
The same faint scent of sea air. He broke it open. Inside was a single page, Monsieur Poirot. You think the raven is gone, but it flies farther than you imagine. The Crowhursts were only one branch, others fed upon the same trade, and one sits even now among your lawful friends. Look closer. The shadow has moved to London. A friend, Poirot, folded the letter with care, slipping it into his pocket. "Ah," he murmured, "even the truth leaves footprints." Japp frowned. "You think it's genuine?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Genuine enough to be dangerous. Lies often wear the mask of warning, but truth, truth wears none." That night, Poirot and Hastings dined quietly at a small restaurant near Piccadilly. The rain outside was soft, persistent, like memory refusing to fade. Hastings looked up from his soup. "Poirot, will you tell them? About Clara?" Poirot stirred his tea, the spoon moving in slow, perfect circles. "Non, mon ami. Some truths serve no justice, only sorrow. Lady Helena's death will be written as an accident, and so it must remain. The innocent pay too easily for the sins of others." He leaned back, his eyes softening. "The ledger will condemn enough men without adding another child to its pages. Let the raven rest." Hastings nodded slowly, understanding. "Do you—"
Ever wonder, Poirot, if the truth is worth the cost? Poirot smiled sadly.
"Always, Hastings, but truth, like the tide, does not ask permission to come. It merely waits, patient, inevitable, eternal." They finished their meal in silence. When they stepped outside, London was veiled in mist. The lamps glowed dimly. Through the fog, and the distant rumble of carriages echoed like thunder from another world. Poirot paused, gazing upward. A single raven perched upon a nearby lamp-post, its feathers glistening in the lamplight. It regarded him for a moment, calm, unafraid, and then took flight into the night. "Ah," Poirot whispered, "the last witness departs." As they walked toward the Thames, the sound of the river mingled with the city's heartbeat. Hastings glanced at his friend, the small, meticulous man who had once again drawn order from chaos, and felt an ache of admiration. "You'll rest now, won't you, Poirot?" Poirot smiled, that gentle, knowing smile that hid entire worlds behind it. "Rest, mon ami, perhaps, but even the smallest shadow interests me, and somewhere another one already waits." The mist thickened, swallowing their figures as they crossed the bridge. Beneath them the river rolled dark and endless, carrying secrets to the sea, as it always had. And far away, upon the cliffs of Whitby Bay, a raven circled once more before vanishing into the grey dawn, the final echo of a story that began with a letter, a death, and a shadow over Raven Hall.